Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining our growth webinar today. I am Liza Hausman. I'm the Vice President of Industry Marketing here at House, and we are so fortunate to have with us today Mark Richardson. Mark Richardson is highly regarded as a pioneer in developing standards of professionalism in the construction industry. After more than 30 years with Case Design and Remodeling as president and co-chairman. It's one of the obviously leading remodeling organizations in the industry. He is in very high demand as a national speaker, advisor, and author. He's a senior fellow at Harvard University's Joint Center for Housing Studies, which was where we met years ago. Mark was inducted into the NAHB's Hall of Fame, which honors individuals' lifetime achievements in making a lasting impression in the construction industry. He was also honored as Ernst & Young's Entrepreneur of the Year for the real estate and construction sector. And as an authority in the industry, he is still a featured columnist and contributor for publications such as Professional Remodeler, Professional Builder, and many others. So welcome, Mark. Very excited for us to have this conversation today.
Oh, it's great to be here, Liza, and thank you for that very, very generous introduction.
Well deserved. And I think it was important to state because we're really here to talk a bit about how your experience and the lessons you've learned along the way can really benefit folks who are in the middle of their career or starting their careers right now in construction. So, I thought maybe a fun way for us to start out would be to have you, share your interesting story for remodelers who are looking to grow their businesses. Maybe walk us a little bit through your journey and some of the lessons you've learned.
Excellent. So my roots actually go fairly far back. I studied architecture in the 70s, and my thesis in architecture school was actually design build. And I would arm wrestle with my professors that if you could just take design and construction and kind of hook it together, you could not only create a pretty great client experience, but a pretty neat product. So when I got out of school, I actually started with a little business with one of my thesis advisors, and we would go out and design projects and then strap on tools and build them ourselves. And he decided to go back into teaching. And in 1980, I joined a fellow by the name of Fred Case, who had a very small little construction company. And I kind of brought in the design element into his business. And over the course of the next 8 or 9 years, we grew the business by about 10 or 12 times. So fairly significant growth in a short amount of time. And one of the things I found in that process was I was just as interested and passionate about the growing of the business as I was about the architecture, certainly in design. So I kind of reframed it for myself in that I was designing a business and business growth just as much as I was designing houses. In the early 90s, we went through some little bit of weird times. Those that remember back at that point, it was, in the economy, a tough time. So we decided to diversify the business. And in 1991, 92, we launched Small Service Division. And very quickly, that small service division became almost as big as the design build business. And what was interesting in the lessons there was the service business really allowed us to grow client base. And with that client base, we can then use it and feed potentially our design build business, but other legs within the business that we might create. In 1995, we launched a bath division. We bolted on kitchens into that. And then 1998, we actually brought on a national business where we went out in the market in a more of a franchise kind of business model throughout. And by the time I stepped down as president and passed the baton, we were just shy of about 100 million in revenue. And, as it kind of relates to, that kind of journey, because oftentimes I'm introduced in terms of some of the different accolades or awards and those kind of things. But I will say, certainly for all the listeners out there, when I look in the mirror, I see a remodeler, just like you guys, have a lot of sawdust in my blood, really have gone through a lot of different things. And, I share that because at the end of the day, while maybe I've experienced a little bit different altitudes of much bigger businesses than most listening to this webinar, at the end of the day, it's all about certain basic tenets and fundamentals in business.
And Mark, it's an incredible journey. You said you got interested in growth as much as the design side. How did you self-educate yourself on how to run a business? Where did you get those skills?
Well, it kind of goes back to, what are you passionate about? And, when, again, going all the way back to architecture, I was passionate about design, and I didn't really care who the client was, just give me a cool design project. And then all of a sudden I saw by doing nice design, I could create joy in people's lives. And then my real passion became, how did I, develop sales processes and sales tools to be able to get more designs. Then it became more about how can I build a team and then ultimately an organization. So the answer to your question, there's not really remodeling university out there to go and get a degree that says how to grow a remodeling business, but you can apply a lot of your different kind of passions and interests and kind of direct them towards, how do you in fact, develop a business and grow it.
Super. One of the things that you were just highlighting was the diversification that you have in the business. And I know, for some companies, they're thinking about that. Should I diversify? What should I diversify into? What would it take to do that? What are some of the differences that you saw between those different types of businesses? And, maybe how should some of the folks watching this think about, how to evaluate which one might be a fit for them if that's a direction they want to go?
That's a great question. And I'll give you a couple of examples that one were very synergistic and then one that wasn't, that we ended up pulling the plug on. And not because it wasn't a good business, in that it just didn't really fit with our kind of core competencies and what we're about. So when we grew the design build business, the handyman business was really very much about the same client. So it wasn't a new client. It was the same client. It was just servicing them with different processes and systems, different types of projects we were doing. So they were very synergistic. And ultimately, we realized that the handyman or small projects division was really this wonderful business that allowed us to build a client base. Matter of fact, back in the early stages before we started the handyman, we had a client base of about 2,000, 2,500, and we grew it to about 25,000 kind of in the course of the handyman business. So one of the lessons of diversifying is think about how synergistic it is with your existing business, with your team. So the one that wasn't successful for us was what we had a project manager come on board who had a lot of previous experiences in insurance restoration. And we said, okay, well, we're pretty good at growing different parts of the business. Let's start an insurance restoration division of the company. So we started it, and we actually came out of the gate fairly strong, grew it into about a $2.5 million business, but we kept having a lot of challenges, and we realized that the fundamental issues, it was irreconcilable in that the client was not the same client. The client in insurance restoration businesses is the insurance company, not the homeowner. And as a result of that, they were oftentimes dictating what we want, what we were recommending in terms of quality of service, which oftentimes wasn't necessarily consistent with what the client wanted. So because of that, we ended up, drifting away from that particular business, but we kept adding a different layers. But my big lesson in all of this, Liza, think through not just the coolness of the business or the shiny object to diversify into, but how synergistic is it with your culture, with your team, with your product, with your expertise, and with your services. And if it is does kind of fit together, the likelihood of success is much greater.
Got it. It's interesting you said, the handyman business almost became sort of a lead gen source for you for the design build. Where did the bath piece fit in, and how did that complement what you were doing?
Well, the cool thing from a growth point of view about the bath business, matter of fact, I was actually at a Harvard meeting where they talked about the history of the bathroom in the American home. And, just as a sidebar note here, right after World War II, only about half of the homes in the United States had an indoor bathroom. And by 1960, it was about one bathroom per home. And by 1970, it was about 1.5 and almost 2 and so on. And now we have about 3 bathrooms per home. So you can imagine the entrepreneur side of me said, oh my God, in a short period of our history, we went from every other house having a bathroom to, 3 bathrooms per home. So the remodeling opportunity there was huge. So we then said, okay, just purely from a market opportunity, that seemed interesting. But what was also interesting about the bathroom in particular was that it's not only a hugely popular project, but the learning curve for our sales and design and our craftsmen was very short. It was very well-defined learning curve. So we could add additional members to that division, and then therefore we could grow it fairly quickly. Matter of fact, one of our key members that got into was one of our first salesperson in the bath division came from selling tires. But we realized in 30 days, we could make him a kind of an expert in selling bathrooms just because it's a well-defined project.
Got it. That's super interesting. Again, just hearing the dynamics of these different businesses. One of the things I know about you is that, you act as a coach for, businesses that probably look more like many of the folks watching today, watching and listening today. Tell me a little bit about kind of what you've learned about, those entrepreneurs and their motivations, and maybe some of the insights or self-knowledge that has, kind of helped you coach some of these folks to more success.
Well, what's very interesting is, when I, for so many years, had my business and was 100% focused on my business, I thought all the other remodeling businesses that made similar size projects to us were the same. And I realized that they're not all the same and they're not created equal. That out of 10 design build or full service remodeling businesses, there's 9 different ways that they do things. So as I started to work with and coach and help different remodeling businesses, at many, many different levels within the business, one of the things that was a giant aha is that I had to understand the why they were in business before I could understand the what that helped them with the business. And I realized, early on, and partly because of my kind of journalistic thinking and interest, that there were 7 kind of motivations that existed when it came to the remodeling owners that I would run across. Most people, let me say this first, most people are kind of a blend of these. We're not just one or the other. We might be 40% one, 20% another, and so on and so on. So as you listen to these motivations, it's not a bad idea to jot them down and ask yourself, who am I in this kind of blend or formula here? So the first one that I was highlighting here is what I'd call it, they had a job. And it's almost a little disparaging, but the reality is a lot of times remodelers that start business because they lost a job and they had to pay their bills and they had to start doing remodeling on the side, so to speak. And before they knew it, they were doing some work for the neighbors, doing some work for the family. And then they looked at their spouse and said, you know what? I'm in the remodeling business, aren't I? I didn't have processes. I didn't have systems. I was in the remodeling business. Now, with that type of motivation, not always, but sometimes they're just happy to have a job that they can control, and they're not necessarily looking at growth or looking at kind of some of the elements in business to be successful. The second one that I see out there is this real interest and passion about growing a business. And they kind of think of it, the business, as the patient. They're kind of the guardian of this business. It's not about them necessarily. It's about, how do I develop processes, systems, tools, develop a team, and really grow this business that has value over time and ultimately becomes an asset for the future. A third motivation that I find interesting and I've seen out there is what I call more the investor motivator. You have some people out there that look at their business as an investment. They are investors. Matter of fact, this one group in California I've worked with, he even refers to his people, his salespeople, as racehorses. And the racehorses that are running fast get the oats. So, that's the way he thinks. They're an investment to him. And therefore, if they're not performing, that he wants people to move on. The fourth motivation that I see out there that I think is, kind of an important one is the entrepreneur. And that is the one that is out there. Really, they're fired up by innovative and interesting things. Profit oftentimes is a little bit secondary to their own entrepreneurial spirit to get out and chase different kind of objects. I will oftentimes find that they're the ones that if you ask them, tell me about their business, they're involved in so many different things that it's hard to make sense of it. And they keep adding more and more. The fifth one that I see out there, and I don't see, everybody has a little bit of this, but there are some business owners that they're all about this, and that's the ego. I have one friend and business owner that is more interested in being on the cover of a magazine than making a profit. And, that level of ego, I think, the remodeling business is a great business if you need to have something that can feed your ego, because it can really help you feel good about yourself. You may not have a very healthy business, but it certainly allows you to do that. And the last two, Liza, one is, existing, I think, with many businesses, but I almost put in the category, it's a cause. What they care about, something bigger than the business. It may be they care about sustainability in terms of some of the energy issues. It could be aging communities, whatever it is, but they have a strong cause that is really the motivator of the business. And the last one, which honestly probably ties into the majority of the business, is what I would call a legacy. They're creating a legacy. And the legacy could be a legacy for their family members. The legacy could be the team. It could be just for the community. But what is motivating them very, very much more than anything else is, in fact, the legacy. Matter of fact, this one group I work with, he talks about, his community being Baltimore is something that's so important to him. He said, we're not in Baltimore, we're for Baltimore. And it really kind of illustrates, I think, someone that what they really care about is something that is, beyond them and moves forward.
It's fascinating to hear, all of these different, motivations that you've come across, and obviously different people in business situations. And since we're talking about growth, it makes me think that, you probably have some insight into how you define and measure growth, and that maybe that's not the same set of things for all of these different businesses, depending on their motivations.
No, that's so true, Liza. Matter of fact, after I kind of, get someone laying down on the sofa and understanding a little bit about their motivations, then the next stage of the discussions is, let's talk about growth. Another misconception that I think people have is that, everybody thinks about growth the same way. And it's really not true at all. Some people, when you talk about growth, it's all about building the top line, the sales revenue of the business. And that's the way they see the growth. Other people see growth as being the profitability within the business. So they don't really care about necessarily as much the top line as long as they're building the bottom line. Another is market share. How am I kind of putting the stake in the sand and gaining market share, sometimes through satellite offices, sometimes through expanded products and services. So they're gaining market share. Some people look at growth as growth of the team and giving them opportunities moving forward. So, as you think about growth, anybody listening to this, I would also say, similar to what I said before, that, you have to define growth, not just assume that the way you look at growth is the same way.
Yep. I hear a lot, often it's the type of projects or the type of work that they do. They're in one place doing a type of project and they want to move to either, bigger projects or certain neighborhoods. It could be, as you said, kind of growing to be able to employ more of the family, or be able to serve, multiple areas. So it is super interesting.
One thing I would add to it, Liza, because it really ties back into kind of our story. And that was, the element of growth was an integral part of our DNA. And it was an integral part because it was that growth that created opportunities. I truly believe that people would not want to stay with you unless they had an opportunity. I mean, you really think about it. Anyone listening to this, do you want to do the same thing that you're doing now 5 years from now? It's only human to want to move through passages and grow. So if you create an environment or a business that allows for the growth, you're also keeping kind of your business family together, because if they're strong individuals, they'll want to grow and do different things. And the only way to do that is to be able to have the business grow.
Got it. And how might they differ in a family business versus a family business with multiple family members versus a one-person business versus a larger business that's, starting to scale?
Well, when you almost map it out, you can almost diagram growth over a period of time. And I think for many really small businesses, you kind of come out of the gate after kind of speaking in numbers, maybe a $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 business. And for the most part, the owner is doing everything. He's the one that is helping to generate the opportunities, the leads. He's selling the project, he's estimating, and he's probably project managing. He's not necessarily strapped on tools, but he's kind of doing all those parts and pieces. And if you really think about it, if you're kind of a one-man band, so to speak, that you're the singer, the musician, and the drummer and all those things, you don't need to have heavy-duty systems and processes and how do you communicate with each other, because you're just looking in the mirror and communicating with yourself. So what happens is once you get above $1 million and you start to develop more of a team kind of support, so to speak, than a solo support, then from there, that's where I think you really see the business change. So once you get $1 million to $2 million, you start to see, okay, now I'm all of a sudden have a project manager with these. Once you get above 2 million, 3 million, you start to have project managers, sales, maybe someone in accounting. So all of a sudden that starts to grow. And then you get above probably 3, 4, 5 million. All of a sudden, then there's layers within the different disciplines. So you not only at a $10 million, $7 million company have sales, but you might have a sales manager in addition to individual salespeople. So the layers and the complexity of the business starts to change as you grow, which really makes it critical that you kind of think ahead and you stay in touch with, the technologies and the processes to be able to do that.
Yeah, I could see that, putting in systems that grow over time makes sense, but that even from day one, even if you're an individual, that there's sort of client-facing, customer-facing activities that you need a certain level of professionalism, even if you don't have a lot of, team communication. You still have subs, you still have your customers and clients. Are there, I guess, just in general, some potholes or mistakes that that you see businesses falling into that can be avoided?
Yeah, matter of fact, I even had a conversation earlier today about that. And one mistake I oftentimes see with business owners who clearly are committed to growth, but they're looking at filling the void or the need today, and they're not imagining what this individual could do in the future for the business. So one of the areas I really encourage when you're hiring people or bringing on talent, whether they're seasoned or whether they're not, think about where that person's going to be in the future, not just today. Because if you don't, you're going to find that they will maybe be pretty proficient in that role, but then ultimately it may cause some challenges later. It's much easier. Think of it like a chess game. You're thinking several moves in advance. I mentioned earlier, one mistake that I see is oftentimes diversifying into things that are incompatible with the rest of your business, and therefore it adds a degree of complexity. Or I think it's a real challenge for some business owners, and this is kind of what I was talking about, the entrepreneur. They can't help themselves. They're almost addicted to the new shiny object. And I encourage, trying to keep a little bit of a conductor on or have a process in place that you can actually run and filter things before you launch new divisions and business elements.
So it's an interesting time to have this conversation because there's so much demand out there. Is there such thing as growing too fast or too slow? And especially in the context of what's happening today, Mark, what advice do you have for folks out there?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there's interest in the times that we're in, and it's very, very interesting times that I must admit I've never seen quite the dynamic that it is right now. I try to, use metaphors and analogies, not to be clever, but to try to make sense of it. And I feel like on the one hand, you have like a 20-mile-an-hour tailwind, and the other hand, you have a 20-mile-an-hour headwind. And then a lot of these businesses are kind of spinning, so to speak, in there. That demand level, though, is very, very high. And I think that, it's something that you have to really take into account, I think, as you're making your decisions. So because of that, it's not necessarily, I mean, if you just had the tailwind, you could be growing, at 20, 30, 40% a year, no problem at all. But then with this headwind, it causes challenges. But in normalized times, I would say, generally speaking, 0 to 5% growth, honestly, you're going backward. If you're not growing, you're dying. And I would consider that very, very modest, and therefore you not really growth. 5 to 10% is certainly respectable, but you do need to be concerned about, is that going to create some interest for my key team members to want to stay? I always felt in our business, the sweet spot was 10 to 20% growth, because that allowed you to certainly inspire and grow the team, but it also allowed you kind of to maximize profitability and see the best returns. Once you get above 20%, in the times we're in and the go-go times, 20 to 30 is okay. But when you get above 30%, it's kind of like, a teenager growing 6 inches over the summer or something. It's an awkward kind of time, and oftentimes if you don't have all of the systems and processes and the kind of the pillars in place, you're really putting yourself at risk if you get above 30% growth.
Good advice. Nice to have some concrete parameters. Are there sort of tools and technologies that you see out there that help folks position themselves for healthy growth?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, at maybe a little bit more of a broad comment first. Many years ago, 20, 25 years ago, I'd be out on circuit speaking, and I would talk about how technology is going to revolutionize the business. Then starting about 10 years ago, I said, well, okay, guys, that's kind of boring. It already has revolutionized the business. The question is, what are you doing about it? But one of the things that's really significant, Liza, that I don't think people fully appreciate, and I've really seen this over the course of the last maybe 5 years or so, is when technologies move from behind the curtain out in front of the curtain. In other words, technologies become more client facing and benefiting the client more than just efficiencies in the business. And I think the more that you think about technologies, not just as efficiency tools, but you think about them as, how can I have a better client experience? How can I differentiate myself with aligning with really good technologies? You can actually sell projects by letting clients know you have scheduling systems or visualization tools or professional technology driven estimating systems. These are things that, if you really think about it, when you expose clients to it, they gravitate and get excited to work with those professional companies that have those things, not just are using them as an internal kind of tool.
Yep. And that dovetails with some research we did recently, where we actually surveyed homeowners who were in the middle of or who had completed a renovation project and said, hey, what's the one thing that would have most improved your project? And it's not, necessarily cutting edge stuff, but right, number one was better communication, right? And having some technology, right, and something that kind of centralized all the communication. Better visibility into financials, same thing, right? How can they have access? Being able to see the end result. You talked about visualization tools, right? And we've learned, and I think you've seen, it's a sales tool and an upsell tool, right? That it's the reason sort of, I think House has been so successful all these years was, most people can't articulate what they like, but they can point to a picture, or they can look at an image and say, oh yeah, I can see, in 3D now what this is really going to change how I live. And so, we're hearing from homeowners, from clients, from the client side, that there is a lot of demand for that. And so I could see it being a very effective sales tool to be able to say, hey, you're going to be able to work with us in a way that you're comfortable doing.
Yeah. And the way I would encourage, certainly the audience, think about these technologies as an investment, not an expense, and with any investment, you want to see a return on the investment. Well, if I'm able to weave those into my company story and have clients exposed to it, if I get one more project every month or two, I'm getting already a return on the investment of having that technology or weaving it in. And I think the more that you kind of change the paradigm a bit and look at the technologies through different lenses, you're going to not only make better decisions, but you're going to align yourself, with, the strong strategic alliances, certainly like House, that, help you kind of take your business to the next level.
I just wanted to summarize, and please chime in if I missed anything. So, some of the themes that we've covered today, which is, if you're not growing, you're going backwards. And so but growth can mean different things to different types of businesses, depending on your motivation as a business. So it's important to, figure out what your motivation is, what does growth mean to you, and put some goals in place that, would be a positive, 2022, for example, for you as a business, and that setting reasonable growth rates of growth is appropriate, right? Nobody has to set an outrageous set of growth goals, but you definitely want to have some goals in place, and that technology is something hopefully people are getting more comfortable with, because it's something that actually is not just sort of an efficiency lever on the back end, but more of a growth engine going forward. Did I miss anything there?
No, I think, I think you summarized it very, very well. And, like I said, I mean, I can tell you, having kind of been at different altitudes in business, the air up there is pretty cool. And I think that you get a level of fulfillment in terms of your own personal growth, oftentimes by taking things to that next level. So for those of you that are, a little bit nervous and skittish and say, well, it affects profitability if I do this or invest in this, I would also say, if you're not changing, if you're not thinking about this the right way, you're going to become irrelevant. And, becoming irrelevant is probably the biggest insult. And, it may not be about, your ego or other things, but it is important that you kind of make the right moves and do, in fact, move forward.
Great. I think these are great insights, Mark. Let me give you some of the questions that
Sure.
folks have for you out there. So Jason wants to know, what should a growth planning or a growth plan look like? If I sit down at the end of this year, should I do a year in review? What are some basic things that I can do?
Well, I'm one of my themes, and I write about it in my Fit to Grow book, is you want to be aggressive but realistic. And you want to be aggressive in terms of having an edge, but also take into account, the environment, the demand, take into account the history, the team, be very realistic, and not, so you want to keep those two in place. So as a process, Liza, I would encourage, take some inventory. After you take some inventory, have some fairly solid but aggressive but realistic goals, and then you put together a kind of a plan. Now, given the uncertainty, not market uncertainty, but the fuzziness and the fogginess out there, I really encourage, a little bit more of a 12-week plan rather than necessarily a full 12-month plan, because you want to know where you're heading. You want to know that you're, off in the horizon. There is a mountain range there, but at the same token, really make your plan about 12 weeks or the first quarter of the year. And then as you're marching along, monitoring it, and certainly then adjust to the next quarter after that.
Helpful advice. Let's see. So John wants to get a little more insight from you on the differences between small and large businesses. So as a 5-employee business, what are some of the challenges that differ, and how should he think about those?
Yeah, and John may have heard some of this kind of lingo, so to speak. I oftentimes think about really small businesses as more like a practice, whereas you grow to a higher level, it's more of a business. And one of the differences between a practice and a business is its dependence on the owner. When they're small, they're totally dependent on the owner. No different than a medical practice, a legal practice. If it's just a one-man band, you have that person leave and there's no business anymore. So I think that one of the primary differences between a small and a medium and large business is what the owner's role in the business is, and the dependence on the owner, in the process. One of the motivations I think that many small businesses have to grow is so that the owner can, in fact, get a little bit of freedom and get away from the business, and be able to enjoy some of those fruits.
Super. Devin wants to hear a little bit more about the people side. You talked about providing opportunities, wants to hear a little bit more about, what does it mean to provide opportunities? What else can you do to motivate? Obviously, it's hard to retain people these days. So what other advice do you have there around giving people opportunities and motivating them?
Great. Well, another just purely happens to be coincidentally a theme that was a bit integral part of our world, and I've certainly written a lot about it, is that people are your greatest asset. And oftentimes I would ask people, what does that mean? People are your greatest asset. And they very much talk about the importance of people. And I said, no, the key word in that theme is asset. And when you start to look at people as an asset, then you not only treat them with the degree of reverence that you should, but you also start to really demand and want to see a return from that asset. So when it comes to creating opportunities, I know many years ago for myself, and hopefully this resonates for a few of our listeners, is that I knew that the only way I was going to be able to move forward as a leader was to develop the people under me so that they could push me forward rather than me drag them forward. So I turned and would spend, probably a third to half of my time developing the key leadership in my business so that they could be able to, quite frankly, fire me and they could do the job. But more importantly, as scary as that sound to be fired, it really creates kind of an environment or a license for you to do and grow and do other things too.
Let's see. I think we'll take one last question. So Pete is just wondering if you have any anecdotes of, where you coached a business and really kind of changed the direction that they went, like, an example of how that can make a difference, what making a strategic choice or a growth decision or investment, how it can make a big difference.
Absolutely. I think it like kind of the adage, when the student is ready, the teacher arrives, so it all starts with you, I think, having that, you meaning the business, having that hunger for, I think, that help. And when the teacher arrives or a coach arrives, they're going to be able to kind of help you crack the code. And quite frankly, not only share experiences that will certainly help with your path, but they'll also help you avoid making mistakes. So a business that in the Midwest that I work with, when I joined or started to work with them on, again, more of a basic kind of coaching kind of level, they were working out of one room in their basement. And very quickly it became clear they had the product and service down. They just didn't have the business acumen and experience. So we worked on those things. Now they're doing about 3 times the volume. They bought a building. They have a team that's about 15 versus at that time it was about 3 or 4 people. And they've really been able to grow. But most importantly, and the thing I'm most proud of, is they're able to kind of get away from the business. They're able to take vacations, and they can see a place at some point in the future, 5-10 years from now, that they might be transitioning, it to some of the key team members rather than just continue to do all the heavy lifting themselves.
Super story. Thank you for sharing that. Well, Mark, we are again so grateful and thankful to have you here to share all of the wisdom that you have had with the incredible experience that you've had. So I hope everybody out there enjoyed it. And we'll hopefully be back with Mark. We're going to have him at IBS, join us at IBS. So I hope we'll see everybody there. And hope, again, everybody takes some great lessons for this and have a great rest of the year and happy holidays.